Welcome back to Locums Per Diem Physician 101. So right now you've decided you want to pursue a locums or per diem position, but you don't know where to start. So in this video, I'm going to cover what timeline to expect when you're finding a job and all the time leading up to when you actually start your job, how to actually find a job, because that will be the most time-consuming part of this whole thing. And finally, some tips on medical licensing. So first, let's cover the timeline. So the first thing you want to do is to find a job, and that will take up the majority of the timeline. This will be about 3 to 6 months. And in the next section, I'm going to cover exactly what goes into the step, and you'll realize why it's going to be so time consuming. The second step is to get your medical license. So that will take about 1 to 2 months. And finally, onboarding is what everyone forgets about, including myself. And that's going to take about 1 to 3 months, sometimes even more. So if you decided you want to pursue this kind of job, budget anywhere from 9 months to a whole year. So don't be in a hurry to quit your job right away. And I really want to stress the importance of not forgetting about onboarding, because that was where I got screwed with my current per diem job. I was all ready to work. I signed my contract, but it wasn't until 3 months later when I was actually able to step foot in the hospital. And on top of that, I thought I would be able to start a month earlier, but then there was some delay with onboarding and getting credentialed that no one knew of until the last minute, so I got delayed another month. So let's get into how to find a job. So there are 3 ways I would recommend going about this. The first is going through a locums agency, which would be the quickest way. The second way would be the more traditional way, where you go through the job recruiters on websites that post openings as a per diem physician, and then finally using inside contacts. So let's get into all those steps. So a locums agent is exactly what it sounds like, just someone who is gonna go out and use all their energy to find you a job. But differently from your typical agent, they don't earn a commission off of you directly. They earn a commission from the hospital that you're signing a contract with, or private practice. The salary you get as a hospitalist or whatever is all yours, and the locums agent is only taking the commission from the hospital separately. And it's usually like 10-20% of what you're earning. Sometimes they can go up to 50%, but this stuff is not openly disclosed when you work with an agent, mainly because your paycheck is not directly affected. But if you do ask the agent to provide you that information, then they usually will. And that is why this method is the quickest, because they are driven with an incentive for money. So the way I personally did this is I found out the top, most best rated locums agencies out there, and I would find out the email address of all the recruiters, and I would just send a email blast to all of them, giving just the basic information like, here, I am an internal medicine doctor, mention if you're board certified or not, what other certifications you might have, and just specify what area you want to find a locums or per diem job and when your start date is. One piece of advice I got before I started my job search was to not readily give out your CV to these locums agents, and to instead first see the job offer that they're presenting to you, and if it's something that fits your needs, then go ahead and provide your CV. And the reason for this is because if you give out your CV and, malpractice insurance information to multiple agents, the problem is sometimes positions will open up, and if it does fit your needs that you've communicated to the agents, then they will go ahead and present you as their client. And if you've given out your information to multiple locums agents, that can leave them feeling a bit annoyed, because, obviously not all of them can earn a commission off of you. It's usually just one person. Furthermore, if a locums agent has your CV and other documents, and they presented you as their client for a job position, then technically you can't bypass the agent and apply for the job independently because that locums agent has already presented you as their client. And I'll be honest, this has not happened to me. This is just advice that I've gotten. So I have not experienced this firsthand. And if you guys want more information on who to contact as a locums agent, I created a list of 14 agencies that I had personally reached out to and had some success with, and I've included them in the description box below if you guys want to check it out. Okay, so the second way to find a job is to go directly through a job recruiter, and this is the traditional way that you're used to finding jobs in the job market. The problem here though is that it is slower than the locums agents because recruiters are often inundated, and I mean, in my experience, it can take a while to hear a response from some of them. The benefits of going through the recruiters and therefore going directly to the hospital without an agent is that the contract you sign is directly between you and the hospital and does not include an agent, which means the hospital doesn't have to pay someone extra. So that does make hospitals more partial to your contract versus hiring someone who is going through an agent, and therefore the hospital has to pay sometimes a quarter of their own salary. So this results in the hospital being more partial to hiring you as a per diem hospitalist versus someone who's going through a locums agent, because technically you are more cheaper to hire than they are. Another piece of advice using this method is don't get discouraged if there are no job openings for locums or per diem. What I did was I would just apply for the full-time hospitalist position, and then when the recruiter connected with me, then I would say, I'm actually interested in a per diem PRN contract. Is there anything like that available? And this doesn't work all the time, but a couple of them actually had job opportunities like that. But again, the biggest caveat too with this method is make sure you didn't also go through a locums agent and provided your CV, because the risk is they may have already presented you to that hospital position that you're interested in, and therefore you can't sign a direct contract with the hospital. You would have to go through the locums agent. And the last method is to use your inside contacts to find jobs. And that's actually how I found my current per diem hospitalist contract. I actually knew someone who worked at this hospital as a hospitalist from my medical school. So I just reconnected with them. I asked them who they went to for hiring, and I was able to get a direct contact with a independent contractor hospitalist group. But of course, this method is probably the slowest of the three and probably the most serendipitous of the three, because it really depends on who you know. But don't knock it before you try it, because the medical community is very small, and so oftentimes you have a lot of connections that you don't know of. So get chit-chatting with all of your old friends from medical school. So as soon as you find a job that fits your needs, go ahead and start the licensing and onboarding process immediately, but don't completely stop the job search. Like, don't tell your locums agent that, okay, I'm done. I would recommend getting at least 2 to 3 contracts going, because as I said in the first video, these contracts can be volatile. If a hospital hires a full-time hospitalist, then your contract could suddenly be dropped. Or if you sign a contract to cover someone during their maternity leave, then same situation. So it is better to have multiple contracts going at once so you can ensure a steady income. So once you have a contract in hand, then the next step would be to immediately start licensing and onboarding. And I wouldn't recommend pursuing licensing until you've actually signed the contract, because I actually heard from someone that they started getting their license and they didn't sign the contract yet, but suddenly the contract got dropped, and so they already paid the, whatever $1,000 fee, which really sucked. I think they ended up getting another contract in that same state, so it was fine, but make sure your signature is there before you do the licensing. So if you are trying to go for multiple states, I do recommend checking out the IMLC. This is an agency that lets you get licensed in multiple states at once. It's just one application, but they do have qualifications. They don't just take all doctors. I believe you do have to be practicing in a certain state that they've specified for X amount of time before you can qualify. So make sure you guys check that out, and I'll also link that website down below. Also with licensing, I do recommend using FCVS if you're also trying to get licensed in multiple states and you don't want to go through the IMLC, that's personally what I did. It's just this organization which pools your medical school diploma, your residency diploma, your test scores all in one area. So when you apply for a license in different states and you're using FCVS, you personally don't have to go to like the testing agency, your residency, your medical school yourself. That organization does it for you and they upload all of your documents and verifies it. They do require a fee though. It was about $400, but double check that because it could change from state to state. But again, you can write that off as a business expense on your taxes if you are working as a 1099 independent contractor hospitalist. Okay, so that's all the information I have for you on this content. So my final thoughts before I leave you guys would be to be patient in finding a job, because locums, PRN, these contracts are volatile. And that is the biggest downside to having this kind of job and having the luxury of working whenever you want. And a lot of times the perfect job will pop up at the very last minute because realistically, you never know when someone needs medical leave or family emergency leave. So these gaps in work will pop up randomly. Again, if you want the quickest way to find a job, I would recommend going through a locums agency. But if you want to sign a direct contract with the hospital without an agent, you can always go directly through the job recruiter. And don't forget about your inside contacts. I mean, even if you're the most introverted person out there, I'm sure you know one or two people who might be working or might be connected to someone who works at the hospital system. And finally, before you start applying for a license, have that job and more importantly, your signature on that contract in hand before you pay any fees. And of course, if this is your primary source of income, I would recommend going for at least 2 to 3 contracts at once. So that's all I have for y'all today. If you have any other questions, I'm sure there's a million things I haven't covered. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Otherwise, if you like that video, please hit the like and subscribe button. I put out new videos every week. And for this particular mini series, I will be putting them out every other week. And I do think that this Locums Per Diem Physician 101 mini series will be about 4 to 5 videos. But otherwise, I hope you all have a peaceful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!